everybody. Now that we've seen how the Earth can be divided into large distinct areas known as biomes, we're going to look at the interrelationships among living things and their environment, and that's known as ecology. We saw that biomes consist of certain plant and animal species that are adapted to the abiotic factors of those areas. The unique relationship that those species have with the abiotic properties of the area form an ecosystem. And so ecosystem ecologists study the energy flow and the cycling of chemicals among the interacting biotic and abiotic parts of the ecosystem. So that's one thing that we're going to look at today is that energy flow. Okay. So an ecosystem itself, it's a basic unit of ecology, and it's made up of the individual communities or all of the variety of plants and animals of a given area, that's what a community is, along with their abiotic environments. Okay? You can have ecosystems within ecosystems because the communities and the abiotic areas might be a little bit different from one another. So just to kind of illustrate this, the Earth's largest ecosystem is considered the biosphere, right? So that's all of Earth's communities and their interactions with all the water and soil and rock and atmosphere. So you imagine then we have several ecosystems on Earth, right? Here's another way of looking at that. We know there are several biomes in the biosphere, right? And so if we look at one biome here, we know that several ecosystems can be within a biome because a biome can stretch around different parts of the world. Okay? And so while they might have similar animals, similar communities, they're not exactly the same. Okay? And then within each of an ecosystem, you can have different types of communities within those, and so on and so forth. And we get to the so on and so forth later in the semester. We talk about populations and other groups like that. So ecologists, I had mentioned this before, they really want to learn how ecosystems function by examining the energy flow. Okay, so here you'll see that energy passes through the ecosystem in a one-way direction. So energy starts with the sun. Later in the semester, we'll see another source, but mainly it's the sun. Okay? And plants will trap the energy of the sun and use it to build tissues within their body, and that means they're doing work. But when they trap the energy, they're actually only trapping less than 1% of the energy. It's not a very efficient system. We can't collect a lot of the energy. Okay, but as that work is accomplished, you see the heat rising above the plant. That's because as it's using that energy to make tissues, it's losing some of the energy as heat. Okay. Then an animal might eat those plants, right? And so as they eat the plants, they can gain the energy from the plant and they can use it also to make tissues in their body. But as they do that, the energy gets dissipated as heat again. Okay, so once an organism uses energy, it loses some of it. It cannot be reused because that energy gets disorganized into a form of energy called heat. And heat cannot be used to do work. So at each step that you see here, we're losing more and more energy as we go through the chain. Okay? So stay with me. So this shows you a little more simply, an ecosystem, the energy flow actually occurs through food chains, because one thing is eating another thing is eating another thing, right? So when one organism eats another organism, it's actually gaining the energy from that organism, okay? And it passes to the next in a sequence. But remember, every time the energy passes from one body to another, some of that energy is lost as heat. So an organism cannot gain all the energy from the organism that it ate. Okay? So, food chains start with producers, or what are known as autotrophs. These are organisms that can capture the sun's energy, and they do that through photosynthesis. So that should tell you the main organisms that do that are plants. And again, later in the semester, we'll talk about some other organisms that can do that, but right now you're probably familiar with the plants. Okay. Those organisms that eat the producers are known as consumers. Another term for consumer is a heterotroph. So these are organisms that extract energy from organic molecules produced by other organisms. So they're actually eating other organisms. Okay. So you might be familiar with lots of types of consumers too. There are different types, and the type depends on what they eat. Right? So herbivores consume only plants. Carnivores might eat herbivores or other types of animals. Right? Omnivores will eat both plant material as well as other animals. A detritivore eats detritus. That's kind of the leaf litter and things on the ground. And then when organisms die, whoops, I have to move or the lights turn off here, sorry. When organisms die, they decompose. And it's the decomposers that are causing it to happen. They're releasing the organic remains and they're releasing inorganic molecules. And then the producers can take those inorganic molecules up and use them. So each level of a producer and a consumer forms a trophic level. Okay, so you've seen this slide before, and here now I want to discuss the trophic level, right? So herbivores, since they are the first organism in the chain of food chains of the energy flow, they are taking the energy from the sun. They form the first trophic level. Okay? Then when a heterotroph or a herbivore then eats the plants, they form the second trophic level. So again, they're gaining energy from the plant, but they're not gaining all the energy. So we're losing some energy there. Okay? These guys are called the primary consumers. So the autotrophs are the primary producers. The heterotrophs are the primary consumers. But then a herbivore can be consumed by a carnivore. That would be a secondary consumer. Okay, and again, gaining the energy, but they're losing some. And so that would be the next trophic level. They're considered the third trophic level. And we can keep going up. So animals then that eat a third trophic level consumer will then be part of the fourth trophic level. Because again, it's really about energy transfer. It's losing energy in each trophic level. It represents that flow of energy. But always remember that at each trophic level, energy gets lost. It's impossible to consume 100% of energy because always some is lost as heat. So think about this, because energy also has to do with how much work can be done, right? And so you can kind of think about this almost as quantity as well. So think about the number of plants on Earth. There's a lot more plants on Earth than there are animals, right? When you get to animals and you look at herbivores, there are a lot more herbivores than there are other types of consumers, right? So think about all the mice, the rats, the rabbits, the cows, the gazelles, the giraffes. Those are all herbivores, right? And then there's less carnivores and omnivores. And so we keep getting less and less. And that's because, again, we're losing energy through each trophic level. And so there's less energy available to support those groups. Okay. All right, so in nature, though, the energy flow is not linear. I kind of showed you one animal eating another type of animal, eating another type of animal. So energy really flows more through a complex of interconnected food chains, right? And it forms a food web. So a trophic level in a food web influences other trophic levels to which it isn't necessarily directly linked. So for an example, if you look closely at this picture, I'm looking kind of right in the middle and I see 3 insects. And then there's an arrow that points to a woodpecker on the trunk of a tree. So that means the woodpecker is eating those insects. But the arrow from the insects is also pointing to the mouse. So if the woodpecker eats enough of the mice, then if the woodpecker eats enough of the insects, that could eventually affect the mice. So, but the woodpecker and the mice are not directly linked to one another. So that's why food webs are important. So the actions of one species could actually be influencing, either in a positive or negative way, the actions of other species. Okay, very important concept to understand there. All right, I'm gonna end the video here, and then I will start a new video, and we'll take up the subject of biogeochemical cycles, how certain matter gets recycled within the earth.